Hello, and welcome back to this continuation of my campaign diary for our Hot Springs Island campaign. It's been a while since I put up my last video, and we haven't played very many sessions since then, which is mostly why there hasn't been a video. We have had a number of one-shots on the side, and we've been experimenting with switching systems. We've also had some things come up, things come up in our personal lives, and sometimes there's just long breaks between when we can play. But let's go ahead and take a look at where we are. We are actually still in the Lapis Observatory, which is where we left off last time. So in real world time, we've been in the Lapis Observatory for a few months, unfortunately. So basically what's happened here is my players came in on the first floor. They, had some basic encounters going through these rooms. And then they came over to the reception desk where they met there's a painting of a Nereid there, and they managed to free the Nereid from the painting. That Nereid they had an encounter with, I had her basically panic and flood the room and try to run out. There was a pretty fun encounter with them trying to calm her down and also kind of pin her down and question her. But they were able to, through a series of good rolls and good role playing, they were able to get her to join their party, and she's still with the party. So they've continued through the Lapis Observatory. They ended up after that encounter. I had Zeb place an item that they had requested here in the center. So they got a new sword. The rogue picked up a new sword because I think she was the only one without a magic weapon, and she had requested that from Zeb. And I believe Zeb, if I remember correctly, Zeb had actually offered them a few minor requests like that, and that's what they asked for. I had planned to have Delphina the Nereid run across here and then have a encounter with bolt foragers over here, but that never happened. This space is kind of open to the outside, and I thought it would be a good place. In fact, I think it even mentions bolt foragers here in the description, but the Nereid never made it that far. They were able to pin her before she even got out of this hallway. However, while they were picking up that item here in the center, I had them see some movement over here, and so what I did was I had Baxter be following them into the Lapis Observatory. He's one of the NPCs here in the back. And so I had him follow them in, and one of them noticed, because several of the party had very high passive perception. I think one of them has an 18 and one of them has a 21. We're playing in 5th edition D&D. So they went up and pursued this, and that led them to these secret doors down to the basement. And so they continued down to the basement. There was several pretty good encounters with astral spinners and I think some sludges. Probably there's always sludges, especially in the Lapis Observatory. So they continued down here, and they managed to find Baxter in this room 5, the Golem and Sedan room. So there they had a small encounter with Baxter. There was no fighting. I had him be wounded, and so he was trying to heal himself up in there, or rest and escape the encounters he had coming through this room. But there was a social encounter with him, and he gave them some information, and they managed to not kill him, which I was pretty sure that's what they were going to do for a long time. And they all ended up resting in there. They did manage to revive one of the golems in this room, as well as the herald. which you can read about, which is basically this sex god golem. It's like a singing golem that's specially, a sexy golem, and that's been following them around and it's been fairly useful for them so far. It's able to open a lot of the doors in the Lapis Observatory and other places around the island. So after that, they continued on up through the ground floor to the second floor. They didn't do a lot of exploration here. I think they ended up going to the kitchen somehow. There's a secret door there. I don't think they ever went into the ballroom. I think they just beelined into the gold archway, which leads to the third floor. Which is kind of unfortunate because there's some pretty good encounters here with sludges, which kind of give you the idea that the sludges still have some level of personality to them. They're stuck looking at mirrors which show them their ideal selves, which would be elves. However, between several events that happened throughout this entire building, they actually managed. They kind of figured out that the sludges have this personality to them, and so this adventure has been effective in like teaching them that the sludges used to be elves. I've been really happy with that aspect of the adventure, even though they happened to skip that particular part. So they continued up to the third floor, where this is kind of like a bar area with there's a raised platform here in the middle, and there's several bars around. And this is where you have encounters with the what are they called? Alabaster Guardians, which are basically just big golems which are filled with sludges who are trying to use the golems as bodies. And so they had some encounters there. They also had some encounters with astral spinners here in the middle. I don't know if you're told to do that, if I rolled it up on a random table, but basically I had webs all over the middle here. So they come in through here, had immediate encounters with the astral spinners, and then the golems, or the astral guardians, or the alabaster guardians, joined in. And so that was a pretty good encounter. I think they really enjoyed the alabaster guardians in realizing that they were sludges in a golem suit, basically. That was another really fun thing for the players to discover. They did not go to any of these outer rooms. I feel like my players are a little bit scared to just roam through random rooms for random rooms' sake, which is probably pretty smart of them. I've been excited to drop bolt forges on them, and they've avoided so far. So they continued up to the fourth floor, and that's actually where we still are. There's this one line here on the... where is it? The dead oak. So there's a large tree, reach a ceiling, whatever. This was once a dryad's tree. If she's not dead, the dryad is well beyond insane. I saw this line and it kind of sparked my imagination, and I ran with it. So I had an insane dryad here. It says she, but I ended up having mine be male if they have a sex at all. And I named him Cork. So they spent, I think, an entire session here dealing with Cork. I kind of gave this room a sort of feel of like Alice in Wonderland, where they had like a tea party with him, and he was very like open and inviting. But slowly it was revealed that he was trapping them here because he's trapped in this room, and he wants to be free, or at least have company. And so we were kind of dealing with that. And this is, a few things happened around this time, which is one of the reasons why we're trying to switch systems is I was having trouble I wasn't very inspired with 5th edition for a good way to deal with Cork. Like, I didn't want to just make him a bag of hit points. And also, around this time, one of my players had to drop out. The player who plays our cleric, Father Wilmorn, he had some personal things come up, and he had to drop out of the game. And so we kind of took some aside time and did some one-shots in Dungeon World. And since then, we've been playing in Dungeon World. But what kind of happened is... let's see. So... they met Cork. They learned, they kind of explored the gardens. Which I had, since there's a living dryad here. I kind of changed a lot about this room. At least their experience with it. If they happen to kill Cork, the room is kind of revert to what this says. But as it is, I have this being a very verdant room that almost seems like they're outside. But I'm kind of getting off track. So we did a one shot where we did a Martel raid with it's Dungeon World, but I used this add-on, or this booklet that you can get called Funnel World. I'll include links to these things in the description. Which is kind of like, it lets you run a level 0 funnel, which is an idea from a game called Dungeon Crawl Classics, where every player gets several level 0 characters, and you just kind of run them through this meat grinder. So I did a Martel raid where they were trying to get some people and goods onto the island. So we did that as a one-shot to try out the system. And then we went ahead and did some more one-shots. And what we wanted to do in the end was come back and try a one-shot with Dungeon World where it was with the characters we're playing, so we wanted to try and convert them. But maybe, not continue the same story. So we did something in between that. I ended up... one of the players suggested maybe we do we kind of continue it, but it was all a dream. And so I was playing around with that idea, and around the same time, I got this book in the mail called Into the Weird and Wild, which I had kickstarted, which is all about running the sort of weird forest settings. And so I used some ideas from that to create, what would Cork dream of about his homeworld, since he's been stuck here for, hundreds or thousands of years. I forget how long the island's been kind of dead. But he's been stuck here, and I figured, he's dreaming of his homeworld, and it's sort of, twisting into this nightmare reflection of what it was. And so I kind of thrust them in there. And my current idea is that by going through this dream, they will also have opportunities to help Cork escape. I had sort of... I had done a few things here where, Cork doesn't really know how to escape. But I'm imagining that maybe, there's something in this sort of arcane existence that's kind of also a dream world that's kind of locking him there. And I'm also trying to pull ideas from the time loop in the bathhouse so that there's another experience on the island which is similar. So this theme of these time loops and these arcane sort of isolated planes of existence. There might be several of these on the island. This is a deviation from the book, but it was a theme I decided to maybe try and press on the island, which isn't explicitly there. And so far, I've really liked what we've done with that. I'm not really sure where it's going to go. So we started this dream world, and they kind of had some small encounters from the book, and I've kind of tried to keep it weird. Like there would be examples when they would try to investigate, if they would roll poorly, they might sort of like jump forward in time within the dream, and suddenly like somebody's wounded and they kind of vaguely remember something happening, but it's not quite all there. They also don't know how they got into this dream world. But they did discover they were trapped right before being thrust into this. So I figure, Cork just sort of put everyone to sleep in a snap and thrust them into sort of his memory with the hope that maybe they could find something to help him. I'll probably talk about that a lot in the next video once it's sort of resolved itself. So that's where we're at. It's not very much further than where we were last time. As for why we're switching systems, yeah, like I said, Cork, like I've had a lot of issues with running this in 5th edition. Like I've had a lot of concerns as we've been going. It's going to be very quick that they start out leveling stuff that I don't think they should out level quite so fast. And it kind of incentivizes me not to level them up very quickly. Because like I feel like the setting is a survival setting, and it's very quickly going to become trivial for them to survive. It's actually already trivial for them to survive, which has been a problem I've had since day one of running them in 5th edition, especially starting them at level 5. They've never had any real trouble surviving on the island. At least I felt like as the GM. Also, so 5th edition kind of pushes you towards playing very... Like, it's designed around these, 5-foot square grid, which, sure, a lot of that is in here, tactical encounters, and I enjoy that a lot, and it's fun. But I don't feel like my players have been, like, really playing into that, especially since we play remotely. It's very hard for my players to, so I'll have a physical thing out that I have miniatures on, but it's also very hard for my players to describe exactly what they want to do with relation to like precise movement. It's not a big deal, and it hasn't been a huge issue, but I just felt like 5th edition wasn't quite giving us what we wanted out of this, and it wasn't quite jiving with the way we were playing. So I wanted to kind of like feel out some other solutions. So the first thing I went to was Dungeon World, and that's what we've been playing. Dungeon World is a more narrative sort of game. You sort of... The core idea is it's a Powered by the Apocalypse game where you roll 2d6, and depending on like how well you roll, you either fail and something bad happens, or you have a mixed success and something like you succeed, but there's a catch, or you just flat out succeed. And it kind of tries to keep the game moving, which is another problem I have with 5th edition, is combats take a very long time. I lost my train of thought there because a timer went off. So 5th edition, in combat in 5th edition, it takes a long time. And I wanted to I've been trying to find ways to cut that down, but I feel like I can only cut it down so much. And I think switching to a more narrative game, it has let us do more interesting combat as well as narratively, but it kind of does take out a lot of the tactical elements of it, which speeds the game up quite a bit, but it also... Some of my players have not really enjoyed the sudden removal of tactics. So I don't think we're going to stick with... We might stick with Dungeon World, but we were going to try some other things before we commit to anything. the next game I plan to try, and we're going to be doing a one-shot of this coming weekend, is a game called Forbidden Lands. So this is, I feel like it's somewhere in between. It's technically, it's an OSR game, but it's a little, it's hard to describe, but it's not quite narrative, and it's not quite tactical in the way that D&D is tactical. It doesn't work on the grid, so you have you have zones for combat. But the main concept for Forbidden Lands, and I think I'm going to do a review of this game separately, but the main concept of Forbidden Lands is there's sort of this, you wear down your you wear down your gear and your sort of, how do you describe it? You wear down your character as you adventure. And it's not just hit points. In fact, there's no hit points in the game. You actually wear down your attribute points. And so it creates this survival situation where you're actually, like, as you do things, you become exhausted. And so there's this sort of, mechanically it's like a resource management thing. But it creates this narrative about how you're pushing yourself further and further until you either you become broken, which is what the game calls when you're unconscious, or you rest and you kind of restore yourself. There's a lot of really interesting concepts in this game, and to top it off, it is actually created with its own hex crawl survival setting. I'll get into that in a different video, but I really liked what I've read from this game. I don't know if it's going to solve, like, all of our problems. I don't know if there's a system that'll solve all of our problems. But I plan on giving this a shot and seeing what my players think. I think the player that's a little... The main player that's a little let down with Dungeon World, I think will like Forbidden Lands quite a bit. But I actually think my other players may tend to want to play more Dungeon World. So I'm not really sure how I'm going to resolve that issue. And I still really don't know what to do. So probably the main issue that we have with 5th edition, other than the out-leveling and random problems with, I think the out-leveling is the main narrative issue that it creates. Is the amount of time it takes to resolve, especially combat. But every system, like, the amount of time things takes is always a problem, and I'm not really sure what we can do. The main issue, that the real issue is that we have is the limited amount of playtime that we get. And so we go from session to session, and players forget things. We've had breaks where usually we play every 2 or 3 weeks. Sometimes we'll play 2 weeks in a row, but it's not very common. But we had a break recently where it was 5 weeks between sessions, and even I can't really remember what happened in the last session at that point. In fact, now we're coming up. I'm going to be on vacation for a few weeks, so we're going to have another 4 or 5 week break between sessions in the main campaign. And I tried to get to a good ending point, but it wasn't a solid ending point that could, handle a break like that. They got to a town in Cork's memory, but yeah, I don't. This is a problem we're having that I don't really know how to solve right now. I've tried. So a couple things that are not related to any system is what I'm trying to do is reduce. I have found that combat tends, even in Dungeon World, was still being the majority of our time sink. In fantasy games, combat is a huge part of it, especially tabletop RPGs, combat is a huge part of the game, no matter what you're doing, unless you're trying to do no combat. But what I'm trying to do is reduce combats down to a very specific number of hits instead of things even having hit points. Like I go into the combat and being like, regardless of how much damage is done, this is how many hits it's going to take to kill this thing. So D&D does not tolerate that well, because then the party becomes very overpowered compared to the monsters. Although it kind of comes out in the wash because you end up having more encounters, so the hits come from different things rather than a single encounter. But I do think that Forbidden Lands might tolerate that idea better, because the hit points it does have are very low. Like the maximum number of hit points before you can become broken. There's a number of factors involved, but the maximum number is 6 for the players. And then, I mean, monsters can have many, many more than that, but it won't be hard to simplify it down. And Dungeon World handles it well too. But trying to figure out ways to reduce the amount of time so that we can get through more content in a 2 or 3 hour session every 2 or 3 weeks is my biggest issue right now. So if anyone has any ideas for that, I'd be all ears to hear it. So yeah, I think that's where we are. What else have we been doing? To solve some of our other issues, I thought maybe, improving the communication or control of the game would help a lot. So we tried, the tabletop, or the virtual tabletops. We tried Astral, we tried Roll20. I went into those knowing I don't like them. We didn't like them when we tried them. We also tried Tabletop Simulator for a single session, and I like that more than the virtual tabletops, but it's not going to really solve our issues. So we've gone back to me having the miniatures and controlling them, and people just telling me what they want to do. I think with these two games, that's fine. And after taking a break from it and going back to it, my players said they really actually appreciate that more than just having, some images on a website, a poorly designed website, but we won't get into that. So yeah, we've tried those things. What else? Yeah, I think that's about it. I hope this was interesting. I probably kind of rambled quite a bit, and I don't really know how much of how interesting of an update it was. I think in the next video we'll talk a lot about, by the time, it'll probably be a couple months before I make the next video in this campaign diary, and by that time I hope to have settled on one of these two systems, and also resolved the story with Cork, and so we'll have a campaign diary that talks more about that system and that encounter, and how all of that goes. So hopefully that'll be more interesting. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I hope you guys are doing well. Take care. Bye.